Hello, welcome to erictology.net. A little bit, Eric's going to get into some teaching on the holiday that's coming up. October 31st goes into November 1st. It's a very old holiday. Holiday meaning holy day. Is it our holy day? Look at the verse on the screen here. This is the command I'm giving you today. Isn't too hard for you or beyond your reach. It's not in heaven. You don't have to ask who will go to heaven to get this command for us so that we can hear it and obey it. This command isn't on the other side of the sea. You don't have to ask who will cross the sea to get it for us that we can hear it and obey it. No, these words are very near you. They're in your mouth and in your heart so that you will obey them. And this is the truth. This holiday that's coming up is a holiday all around about death. Also in the description, there's going to be links to videos and books, everything you want information about the holiday coming up. My suggestion, don't do it. It has nothing to do with us, because right here, in Deuteronomy 30, verse 15, today I offer you life and prosperity or death and destruction. Remember, we are Yahuwah's. He is our Elohim. And we don't do those things. We literally are making a choice. We are literally making a choice. I'm choosing the holy day of death. But we don't do that. It's not too hard for you or beyond your reach to obey it. Thank you for joining us. And like I said, the link to all the history of this holiday coming up, it will be in the description below. Enjoy this teaching. It's a good one.
You know, we're right at the edge of what they call All Hallows Eve. Yes.
Yeah, November 1st.
Yeah. So Halloween, Hallows evening is the night before. Yeah, from what I understand, a few years back, Halloween took over as the preeminent holiday beyond even Christmas accoutrements and decorations. And you know, people putting stuff in their yard and decorating their house. I was at one fellow's house one time, was doing some work, and he had thousands of little Halloween knickknacks all over the place. It was just his thing, you know. It's like, if you have no reason to consider that's, let's just put some labels. Is it bad? Is it wrong? Is it a sin? Is it just art form? Is it just a frame of mind? Or is it just a cultural bearing, like a buoy out on the ocean or a lighthouse along the shore? These monthly festivals, cultural holidays, are just markers of the year. Is there anything wrong with that? Can anybody say, well, you'd have to turn your mic on, but can anybody say, if there was a letter that we could assign to Halloween, the concept, what would it be? Because we're talking about Hebrew letters. Okay, so if I keep saying, well, everything's in the letters. So does anybody want to venture a guess with a reason? What letter would be equated with a Halloween concept, a thematic correlation?
Sheen.
Rhonda says a sheen, which is the teeth and fire. And I have it orange on the somebody getting eaten, flames of hell or something. Okay, there's a I have it as orange, and people think of jack-o'-lanterns as orange and zigzag teeth. Anybody else have another idea?
A Tav.
How so?
Because it's about death.
And what does Tav have to do with death?
Because that's, you either go to the full life or you go to full death. And that's participating in the, what are they, talking to the dead and so on. Has to do with portals and the dead people who are probably in their graves, not up in heaven communicating with them unless there's demons. But it's a death celebration. Look at all of the goblins and all of the horror that's involved. It all has to do with death, not life.
Okay, does anybody else have another idea? What
Yeah,
letter?
I would think it probably the letter het. Either you're inside the fence or outside the fence, because it comes from the Druids, and the Druid had Stonehenge, which is somewhat of a fence. Either you're inside or you're outside. They can have their own fence and their own place inside. So to me, it could represent that. They have fenced in their understanding, their teaching for their people. And if you're inside the fence, you can be part of what their group is, like Halloween is. And so it's just a thought. That's all it is.
Yeah, we're just contemplating. The Elohim is the Elohim of the living, not the dead. So what letter would you say that was? Is that, I didn't see who that was that put that up, couldn't see the face. Is that Russell or?
That was random.
How
Go
about a tet? Hell in a handbasket.
That's what I was gonna say.
Hell in a handbasket.
Walking around
So
looking for treats and goodies.
the letter tet is a full basket. So see, the interesting thing about this is that if I said there's a certain letter that I think of, it's like, oh, is that the letter? What we're seeing here is that if you understand the meanings of the letters, you can see subjects in probably each one of the letters. So there's a reason, and it's not that one letter is correct and the other letter is the wrong answer. It's like, can you see what's going on by understanding what these different letters are about? And I would have to agree with everything that's been said. Does that, somebody else have another idea?
I would say maybe iron.
And how's that?
Well, it's just for this, I guess, particular so-called festival. It's, the other realm, during looking into the occult and to the spirit realm and the witches and the all-seeing eye, and some relations into that.
There's a reason why I think that the ayin relates to the concept of the occult, both because it's a letter ayin, which means eyeball, eye, and that's where we get the word ocular, and also occult. But occult, by definition, doesn't necessarily refer to witchcraft and sorcery, necromancy, but it has to do with something which is either seen or unseen. So the unseen world, back in the olden days, hundreds of years ago, I believe, in English language, the word demon referred to both the good ones and the bad ones, both the ones who were melach, which were, you might say, messenger servants of Elohim, and the ones that were the fallen, the Nephilim angels, the fallen from his service and his grace, you could say, or being in his company of Zavot. So demon wasn't bad, but it became, as language changes, okay, the demons are the bad guys and the angels are the good guys, just for what that's worth. But they're both invisible, both unseen, and yet both have effect on what we do. That gets in, I did a study a couple years ago, I think I've talked about it before, about dimensions, and that the Psalmic lining up with the menorah, day 4, put sun, moon, and stars in the sky, has to do with time, and time is a calibration of life, and life, as in terms of plant life, was made on day 3, and if that is a type of dimension, if life could be considered a type of dimension, then time is a regulation of that dimension. Then all of a sudden following Psalmic is ayin, which is the occult. And how is that considered beyond time? They're outside of time, and we don't even see them, but they're affected. But then that's followed by the pay, and if the pay can be seen as the pure heart, the Beatitude of Matthew 5, and the altar of incense, which is the prayers of the saints, then that's where I come up with the idea that the prayers of the Kadoshin Elyonin, the Kadoshi of Yahuwah, you might say overrides and is more powerful than even the occult, is because Pei follows ayin, and ayin follows Psalmic, and Psalmic follows Noon, which is this life from the, Memnoon, or that was day 3, where the plants. and that humans were created on day 6, lining up with that letter Pe. And then beyond the Pe is the letter Zodi. What does Zodi represent? Can anybody say how the letter Zodi might have something to do with the concept of Halloween? Anybody there?
Axe and sword, axe and sword.
Well, the sword and the axe is technically more like the Zion, the 7th letter.
It's like something, it's like something coming out of the grave, sprouting out of the grave, which is the dead coming back to life, which is what they do at Halloween.
Exactly. So that's where my mind went. But I wouldn't negate or be in conflict with any of the other considerations that anybody said. So the significance of the Mishkan pattern, which is what we've been talking about the last few weeks, which is a basis for the whole study, is that the letter Zodi lines up with the Ark of the Covenant in terms of the Mishkan. And in the Ark of the Covenant was the tables of stone, the tablets written by the finger of Elohim, the 10 Devarim, the 10 words or the 10 commandments, as people say. And there was a bowl with some manna in it, and then Aaron's rod that budded. And so if you go back to the story, that same, remember, Moshe had a speech impediment, and so Aaron was doing the talking for him, but Yahweh would communicate with Moshe. So Moshe was the liaison, Aaron would speak. So if you looked at the letter Zodi as a straight line with this flourish coming off the side, little sprout, you could say Aaron's job was Moshe's Zodi. Moshe is this standing, like the vertical, if I draw the Zodi in the motif of a straight line with a sprout coming off the side, Moshe was the one who was supposed to receive from Elohim, and he communicated with Aaron. So that's why quite often there's verses that said, and Yahweh spoke to Moshe saying, speak to Aharon and his son saying, this is how you, for example, Numbers 6:22, this is how you bless my children of Israel, the Aaronic benediction. So you realize it's a relay, it's a handoff. You know, Moshe receives from Yahweh, and then it's handed here and here. But those are sprouts, as it were. Those are Zodi pictures. And so when I saw that the Aaron's rod, remember Korah was rebelling against the nepotism that Moshe seemed to exhibit, which is to say Moshe was the top dog, and he put up Aaron, his brother, as the high priest. And Korah was saying, hey, you guys just knock it off. This is we're free individuals. We have a right to participate in the governing authority of our confederated tribes here. But he had a heart of rebellion, and that's where Yahuwah said, okay, to have all the leaders of the 12 tribes bring their walking sticks and set them in a pile here. And I'll show you which guy should be the high priest. And the next morning they come back, and the dead, dry walking stick that Aaron had for years, remember that's the same stick that he threw down in Pharaoh's presence. Pharaoh's magicians had thrown their sticks down and they turned into snakes, and Moshe threw down Aaron's stick and it turned into, some say it's a tannin. It's not a nachash necessarily. Actually, both words are used, but that would be perhaps a crocodile, more like a big sea serpent sort of thing, not necessarily a little snake like we might see in the movies, but it ate the two magicians, Janus and Jambri, I think their name was, it ate their snake sticks, and then he picked it up by the tail and it turned back into a stick. And that was the stick that sprouted and went in the Ark of the Covenant. And so the picture of a stick with a sprout is the letter Zodi. And other people draw the letter Zodi in a different way. Some people draw the Zodi horizontal with a little thing coming out of it. These stories in the Torah, I had very specifically in mind when I chose the letter shape that I use for the Zodi. And it was very specifically Aaron's rod that budded in the Ark of the Covenant. And remember that night, it's a dead stick and it sprouted a twig and leaf and blossom and fruit. The fruit would be almond. It was an almond stick. And the word almond, Zechariah, just to show you the play on words, I think it was Zechariah 1, Yahweh says, hey, Zechariah, what do you see? And he says, I see an almond branch. And Yahuwah says, very, very good. And as a matter of fact, I am industrious and diligent about my plans, my intentions, my ideas of my heart that I really want to do, which is kind of Aleph stuff. He said, but I'm industrious and diligent. You could say, well, what's that got to do with an almond? The exact same word, Shin Kuf Dalet, is both almond and industrious and diligent, which shows an intention about you have an idea that you want to do something. You say, I'm not gonna let this go. I'm gonna make sure this happens. As they say, come hell or high water. Well, that's Yahweh. That's what he does. And that also is a synonym with the word spelled Aleph Bet or Aleph Bet Hey, which is to say, well, Aleph Bet, that's father, but it also means a sprout of springtime verdure, V-E-R-D-U-R-E, verdure, where, I think that's how I spell it. Anyway, I'm just, the idea of this youthful vigor is also in the same word for father. It's a desire for or a passionate distaste of being against a certain concept. And people have different ideas of who is God or who is their God or who is the Lord. Well, Yahuwah never called himself the Lord, never called himself God. Approximately 7,000 times he had his name Yod-He Vav-He written in the scriptures. We're having a conversation yesterday about this notion that I had heard back in, say, 2002, about when I bumped into the Fossilized Customs book, that his name meant the omnipotent, eternal creator of all things who causes himself to exist. And I asked the fellow leading the group, what does that mean? How do you get that? He said, I don't know. It's just somehow in the word. You got to figure it out. So what do you mean you got to figure it out? I don't know. But so we're taking this time to elaborate on how you figure that out. So Yod, He, Vav, or Wa, He, 4 letters. Any verb which is spelled with Yods and He's and Vavs is the verb to exist. And it can have Alephs and Tavs thrown in, and it still means to exist. And if you add a prefix or a suffix of a nun or a tav or a lamed, perhaps even a mem, it still means to exist because that's the root verb base. So if He Vav He means to exist, Yod prefix means he will. He will what? He will exist. That's self-referential in the third person regard, but it also, because it's the hand, the creator's hand that works, this Yod that grabs, and the letter Vav is a connector, and so you almost look like a train coupling device that grab on like that between the train cars. You could see with a Yod and a Vav, that's an easy picture. One reason I use the Vav shape like that is because it's a grasping connector, and you don't see it the same way if you draw it like that with a slashed angle. That's more like a picture hanger, coat hook or something. Anyway, the idea that He Vav He is something that's expressed, that's He, and then there's a connector like a bridge, a nail, and then another He. So if you have a city and a roadway and then another city, the roadway is the connecting the two cities. Just pictures in the words. But Yahuwah, his identity is all wrapped up in his heart, his preference. That's how you determine his identity. We could say, well, he's the maker, thus possessor of heaven and earth. Kuf Nun He, Kana, Hashemayim Ve'aretz. Okay. Yeah, but there's a bunch of people that believe in gods that they claim are the creator. The sustainer, the controller, the guy running the show. Okay, well then, for Yahweh to say, well, that's me, then that's no difference. They all claim, well, he's the guy that decided to somehow come down here in his personal essence, let's put it that way, as a human, dressed up as a human in human clothing, and walk the face of the earth that he made. And there's this idea I think it's in the Psalms or Proverbs that it says, heaven is his throne and earth is his footstool. I mentioned this once before. I looked up the word for footstool in Hebrew, and we might think of it as an ottoman, like the Ottoman Empire, from what we now call Turkey. But that's a place to put your feet. You sit back in a chair and you lift your feet up and you put it on an ottoman. So that's a footstool. But I wanted to see what the Hebrew word was. It literally means the place you put your feet. The reason I'm mentioning that is because some words are not. See, in English, we have words which are sounds, like the word chair. You think, well, what's a chair? It's a sound that we make, which we associate with that object, and there's no reason to go any further. And so you teach your children or teach a foreigner who doesn't know English that this is called a chair. Okay. And I was reading this book talking about linguistics and how there's a certain man, I forget his name, made a bold statement that says that's how language works. It's just words which are sounds which we assign a reference to an object, and the way the word is spelled, the reason for those particular letters have no bearing, no reason. That's completely not true. That's exactly what the study of Paleo-Hebrew is. Every letter can be determined as having a very specific role and purpose. And to say that the 22 letters are the personal expression of the author of the word, of the communication, of the sentence. So if the alphabet is not just one word, 22-letter word, but also a communique, an entire communication, which could be read as a shin yod het. So Mashiach, mem shin yod het, is actually the one who, or the object of, or the place where shin yod het happens. And shiach, shin yod het, means to swim, or it's the pit of water that you swim in. It's to look down, which you do, bow your head when you are swimming, but it's also communication and conversation. So you realize that if shin yod het is communication and conversation, then mem shin yod het can mean the tangible, because mem shin means mush, or to touch or feel, to grope, the sense of touch, the sense of. So I can read into that he came down here to engage the conversation tangibly in the aspect of a human. Now, how he did that and what that means, that's a different conversation, which we've addressed before. We can talk about it again in more detail, but Yeshua pointed us to worship his Father, not himself, but to worship his Father. That's what he told us to do. And he referred to his Father as his Elohim. He didn't say, I'm your Elohim. He says, your Elohim and my Elohim, your Father and my Father. Well, he put himself first reference. But what I'm saying is that if I looked at the Aleph as the first letter, as a prefix letter, and it means I am or I will, because that's the way words are spelled, then the communication is self-referential. Okay, so then if he comes down as the Mashiach, oh, that's the Messiah, oh, that's God incarnate. Not necessarily. That's not necessarily our regard. But for me to say, somehow he came down here, whatever he did, we're just going to jump ahead to the story. Somehow the infinite Almighty, who has no body, no form, put himself into body and form, that's the letter bet, into the realm of time and space. Space is a type of dimension. It's a theatrical set. And then time regulates. So here our great physicists talk about space-time. Albert Einstein, Stephen Hawking, various other people from around the world studying physics talk about space-time. That's just our staging. Well, if that's Samic and the occult is the ayin, then the words, when Yeshua opened his mouth, Peizadi, something supersedes the authority even of the occult by his words. But for the grave to open, if Yeshua gets crucified, Zion gets thrown into the grave, Tet, the round rock, Tet rolled in front of it. So Tet's both a basket, it's something round. There's a round rock that could be a potter's wheel. I'm just saying there's these images associated with the meaning of the letter, but the letters are telling a chronological story which can be read a number of different ways. I'm just trying to show you one lining up with Yeshua. So he's in the grave 3 days and 3 nights. So I can look at Kaf Lamed, that's like 1. Memnun is 2. And then Samek Ayin Pei, all 3 of those working together, there's day 3. And then it's Zadi. He pops out of the grave, resurrects. So the same way that Aaron's rod budded, the dead stick lives, the Zadi is this sprout of the dead thing coming back to life. Well, that's Halloween. That's the zombie apocalypse. So it's talked about in the Hebrew letters. Well, then what happens? Kuf. What does Kuf mean? Back of the head. But that's not all it means. That's the way it's kind of drawn. So the picture of the back of a head, well, remember, in the womb, Jacob and Esau were contending and kind of wrestling, and Rachel was going, what the heck is going on here within me? And well, you have 2 nations fighting. It's like, can't the boys just get along, and they haven't even been born yet? Well, Esau was he kicking Jacob in the head? Jacob put up his hand to grab his foot, and it's like, oh, you're trying to take his position. Well, either that or he was trying to defend himself from getting kicked in the head. Which was it? Maybe a little bit of both. Nobody knows. But the letter Kuf is a picture of the back of the head, but it's also a picture of this long reach. So the word Kuf also means monkey, like a monkey's arm. But how do monkeys swing through trees? They got those long arms, but they got their tails, and they reach and they swing. Cygnus the swan, as I've mentioned before, a constellation that has a story related to it where it takes off, goes to the far side of the universe somewhere, but it comes back around. So that idea of the circuit that comes back around is a picture of resurrection. And then it's also the Kuf has to do with, or the word Yaakov, Yod, Ayin Kuf Bet. Well, the Yod is a prefix letter, so you got Ayin Kuf Bet, but that has to do with the wake of a ship, leaving a trail. Well, it's the same type of story as the Israelites in the Exodus. Put their foot down on a stone and scratched the outline of their foot, leaving a trail of footprints all through what we now call Saudi Arabia, all through the wilderness. What I'm saying is that as we read these different Bible stories and realize that they're all staged as part of a bigger story, the bigger story is in the Aleph Bet. The bigger story is Yeshua's personal story. So if you're raised in let's just say a Jewish consciousness, whether or not you believe the Torah, whether or not you call it sacred or whatever, but I have heard, what do I know? But I have heard that the Jews have no regard of Yeshua. They call him the Nazarene, or they call him the infidel, or they've made up an acronym of the letters of Yod Shin Vav Ayin that means may his name be forgotten and desecrated forever. That's when they say Yeshua, that's what they mean. They read it as an acronym. Like SWAT, Special Weapons and Tactics, SWAT, a police squad. That's what they do with his name. So you never know whether somebody, if they're mentioning the name, has a real regard or not. But what I'm saying is that to assign Yeshua the chronological narrative of his story through the Gospels, the Jews don't do. And they're told not to. And they're told it's a filthy thing to do. Well, if you don't regard Yeshua, you're never going to see what these letters actually mean. That's, I think, the secret code in Ayin Dalet, Ayin Tav. Understand the Dalet, Yeshua claimed to be the Dalet. Understand the Tav. The Tav is the marker, a sign, which is the meaning of the letters, which is also the sign of the covenant. So if you think the covenant was nailed to the cross, you're going to never see the message in this alphabet. You're going to miss half of what's written in the Torah. So this idea that the identity of Yahuwah being referenced by the Aleph is wrapped up in Yeshua being Mashiach is a critical understanding and consideration of this entire alphabet. And the fact that he was put to death, letter Zion, entombed, letter Het, and 3 days and 3 nights later sprouted back to life, Zodi, is everything. And if the Jews, or let's just say the pagan is a religion, heathen I think is more of a non-religion, or some other religion that's so far removed it defies classification. It's not necessarily a non-religion. They believe in some things, but pagan is a very specific, what you might call old Europe. You might think of druids, you might think of nature lovers. That's not a bad thing, but referencing nature as God and getting into all sorts of what we would call occult practices. But you got to be careful what you label pagan, is all I'm trying to say. But it certainly is associated with witchcraft and sorcery, necromancy, and we'll get into Deuteronomy 18:9 and Leviticus 19, chapters 19 and 20, talking about where Yahuwah tells us to leave that stuff completely, absolutely alone. If you have anything to do with it, he'll cut you off from being his people. So that's the upshot threat of why we should have a regard to these matters, because Yahweh says do certain things and don't do certain things. And with the don't do certain things, he says anybody who is of Israel or sojourns with Israel and who participates in doing certain behaviors, which include witchcraft, sorcery, necromancy, magic arts, fortune telling, and any of the like, should be put to death on the face of this earth and cut off from being any part of his people as far as his regard goes, which is an eternal destination of damnation. This is serious stuff. So the point is, if Yod Hey Vav Hey, you got a hey connected to a hey, a city connected by a roadway, a highway to another city. But Yahweh says that Mishpat is the foundation of his throne. That's his character. And if we don't understand Mishpat, we got the wrong God. If we don't understand that when he says a man's way is returned on his own head, that's Hey Vav Hey. It's not just that he causes himself to exist, or he causes the world and the universe to exist, which he does, but it's not just that. Hey Vav Hey, which means to exist, can also mean justice, which he sustains its essence. He causes justice to exist. And the word justice being the word mem shin pei tet, mishpat. Shin pei tet is the word judge. So is dalet nun dan, but it's a different type of judgment. But the judge is the one who has to determine equity, meaning what you do comes back. If you seek Yahuwah with all your heart and soul, then your reward is life and other benefits, which we're going to get into. But if you counter him, resist him, rebel against his ways, then what comes back to you, the Vav, the connector that is expressed in your life, is absolutely certainly based on and determined by your particular choices and actions. A man's way is returned upon his own head, both in this life and what's coming after this, that we can only have some vague reference to. And Yahweh is the one who ensures that that will happen. So when he says, whatever you do is coming back, blessed are the merciful, for you shall receive mercy. The measure you use is measured back to you. And when he says the Tefillah Abenu, the prayer of our Father, the Lord's Prayer, if we say, forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors, or forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us, we have to set up and qualify first. So that means he has to allow a trespasser, a debtor, an offender, who we then determine our action, both heart and behavior and words, of how are we now going to deal with this offender. And whatever measure we put out to deal with that offender goes in the scales of balance on our side, and he turns around and measures it back to us. That's really serious stuff. If that's Yod He Vav He, a man's way will be returned on his own head. Now, whether or not this is true, Abraham Lincoln, back in the last days of the American Civil War, 1865, said that he had a belief or an understanding, a comprehension that every drop of blood drawn by the whip on the back of a black man or a Native American or some other type of injustice was repaid by the gash of a saber in the American Civil War. Close to 1 million people killed and wounded. And if that is the retaliation, the repercussions, the restitution of justice, this is no simple matter. This is no laughing matter. This is no fun and games. But why do we have the consciousness then of blood and gore and hacked bodies of Halloween? Well, we're going to get to that. We're going to have this off within 5 minutes here. So the idea that death is certainly part of the life on earth. You know, the word spelled mem tav, mat, just so you know, that's the word dead body or death in Hebrew, mem tav. And when I asked, well, why would somebody say that tav refers to as death? Well, mem, that's a womb of life. So why would a womb and the sign of the covenant, mem and tav, why would those be the word for death? But here, let me read the last verse of Daniel 12, verse 13. As for you, referring to Daniel, go to your end, you will rest, then arise for your portion at the end of days. That's the last phrase in the entire book of Daniel. So in assigning a correlation between the alphabetic letter sequence in Daniel 12, starting with verse 4, that's a different subject we've talked about. It ends with this. Well, Sheen, I would then line up with, see, let me back up to verse 12. Praiseworthy is he. Well, that's the letter Resh, because the letter Resh is an honored man. So there's this secret code of the alphabet embedded in Daniel 12. If the letter Resh, praiseworthy is he who awaits and reaches. Now, either the number is the letter Sheen, 1,335 years, or that whole thing is the Resh, and then the Sheen would be, as for you, go to your end. Well, what do you mean go to your end? Daniel was still alive. He is an old man, but live out your life. Burn out your flame, your spirit, your life essence, like a flame fading out and then snuffing out. But the Tav lines up with, then arise for your portion at the end of days as a promise. So to say, oh, Tav means death, I could say, well, wait a minute. In this regard, Sheen means death, and Tav means arise to your portion at the end of days, which is a real other. It's like Tav then becomes this sign of there's a whole new thing that we don't know anything about yet. If Sheen is death, it's like a temporary death, like the sleep, and then everybody's going to come back to life and face the judgment. Well, we're going to get into a little bit more of that. It's time to stop for a break. But I'm just saying that on the one hand, we can think, oh, Tav is the end, it's death. No, Tav is waking up for a whole new beginning. And it's like, well, maybe it's both. But I'm just saying, as we ponder what Yahweh said and assign it to the various letters, that's the exercise. Pondering Yahweh's words and letters and linking them to what he said and navigating the alphabet. That's what this exercise is. Anyway, time for a break.